you have to remember that if you don't hustle and if you aren't out there and putting your name out there, there are like 50 people plus who are doing that and more. Yeah. And are likely going to get that opportunity before you do.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I am your host, Jack McCarthy. This is episode 226. I'm flying solo today. Ed's not here. He's out on the road. However, I am not alone. I'm really excited about this episode today and our special guest. We're going to be diving into a territory that we don't often get to talk about on the show, and I think that some of y'all that are listening are going to be really interested in this. We're going to be breaking into the world of A&R and publishing and songwriting and producing. And I'm really excited to announce and welcome to Creative Juice, the head of A&R at Prescription Songs in Nashville, Katie Mitzell Fagan. She's here to talk about all things A&R and give some incredible insight and advice to indies that are trying to break into that space in the music industry. So without further ado, Katie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to start off, I'd love to just give our listeners kind of a chance to get to know you a bit, learn a bit about how you got started in the music industry and how you ended up where you are today in Nashville, working at Prescription Songs, and just get a sense of who you are and, what you do.
Yeah. So I am originally from Indiana, born and raised. I started singing when I probably started talking. Thought for a long time that was probably what I wanted to do. And then quickly realized about midway through my senior year of college, I was at Indiana University for college, and I was a vocal performance major there, which was awesome. They have a program at Indiana University where you can create your own major, and there's a great music school there, but it's mostly opera and classical. And I learned pretty quickly that was not really my thing.
Not for you.
So I created this popular vocal performance major. It was awesome. I got to take some really cool classes, including like music of the Beatles and music of Bob Dylan and history of jazz. And I learned a lot about just kind of the classics. And so anyway, I was thinking I was going to perform, realized that I definitely didn't have the grit for it about halfway through senior year. And it just so happened that a roommate of mine at the time had an older brother who had a couple internships in music. And I was having a moment. I was like, oh, what am I going to do with my life?
Sure.
And she said, let me just reach out to him and see if he knows anybody. And at that point, I had been sort of cold reaching out to random people. Honestly, I was emailing the most random people you can think of, like my parents' friends and just friends of friends from summer camp and stuff like that. Just like, I think you live in LA, or I think you said you might know somebody who works in music.
Sounds so much like my story, senior year of college.
Yeah. You're doing the thing, you're hustling, you're trying to get the in somewhere. And that was honestly advice I always got, was just like, you kind of it's all about who you know. So you just got to put yourself out there and see who will take the bite. So my roommate's brother ended up responding to me pretty quickly, and he was like, cool, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. I know I like discovering music. I know that I love listening to music, and I think, finding new artists is always really exciting. And he was like, cool, that's called A&R. So let me introduce you to some people. And so, I immediately Google A&R, artist and repertoire, trying to figure out what that is. And he introduced me to two friends of his, both people he had interned with before. One was a guy named Juan Madrid, who was the SVP of urban music at Warner Chappell at the time. And the other guy was this guy, Chris Anacute, who was the SVP of A&R at Capitol Records. And he introduced me to Chris as the guy who signed Katy Perry, which blew my mind at the time and still does. But, this was the teenage dream era. So it was just, I couldn't believe I was like meeting someone that close to Katy Perry.
Really the up ramp for Katy Perry.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So I reached out to both of them. Juan ended up passing me to his assistant at the time, who was in charge of all the internships. That was what they were able to offer me. Chris wasn't hiring. He just said to stay in touch with him. So I decided to go with the internship. I extended my graduation so I could get school credit for it, and needed to get my foot in the door because I had no music experience whatsoever. And I graduated from Indiana University, moved out to LA 5 days later, signed a 6-month lease, and was a music intern there. I didn't even really know what publishing was. I just, it was what was given to me. I knew that Warner Chappell was a company under Warner Brothers, obviously was familiar with that company, went on their website. There were some big names listed. So I was like, cool, this seems like a cool music thing. I'll give it a shot. I ended up doing a lot of sorting CDs, which sort of ages me. But it was a lot of that. And one thing I did learn was one of my tasks was putting songs into their system for splits. And I didn't really know what splits were. No one ever really explained it to me, but I did. I was seeing a lot of the same names over and over again. So even like Katy Perry's real name, Katherine Hudson, and Bonnie McGee, and Martin Sandberg, who was Max Martin, even my now boss, Lukasz Gottwald. I was seeing these names over and over. And in retrospect, I was actually learning a lot about publishing right there, but I just didn't know it at the time.
Yeah. Learning by osmosis.
Yeah, totally. And it was crazy because it was all hit songs, and it was, Party in the USA, Miley Cyrus, which was a massive song when I was in college and still is today, just these classics. And I was just seeing all of these names over and over. And I'm like, okay, so all these people are on the same songs. I ended up getting a job after that internship ended with someone who was working, or it was my boss's. So Juan Madrid, it was his friend. She was hiring. She was a publicist. So I took that job. I needed a job. It wasn't music, but he was like, listen, it's entertainment adjacent. It'll give you some experience. And I stayed in touch with Chris Anacute all the while. He was always so kind to me. He was a very busy guy, but he always just said, hey, stay in touch with me. Let me know what you're up to. But he still just wasn't hiring. So I just kind of would stay in his ear, poke him every couple months. Hey, I'm still would love to get into music. I decided pretty quickly PR was not for me. I did stick that job out for about 6 months. And honestly, I was in a point in that job where I was starting to feel pretty desperate to get back into music. I was getting to a point where I was like, if I don't find something, I'm probably going to move back to Indiana because I don't know what to do. LA is a tough place to live. And when you don't like what you're doing and, all I wanted to do was be in music, it was starting to really weigh on me. And Chris responded to me pretty quickly on this one desperate plea. I emailed him and I was like, listen, I know we've never met still, but you've always been so kind to me. And I really want to get back into music, and I'll literally be a janitor. I'll be an intern again. I'll do whatever it takes. I really want to do this. And he just so happened to be sitting with my now boss, who was looking for an assistant. And he said, Dr. Luke's looking for an assistant. Send me your resume. And the rest is history. I had about 6 interviews and I got the job, and I was essentially his personal assistant for about 2 years. And then when we started building out the publishing company, or when he started building out the publishing company, I moved out of his house, which is where I was working. And we got a real office space, and we started building Prescription from there. So really before that, he was just signing his friends. His first couple of signings were Katy Perry and Benny Blanco. And it was just people he was, he loved making music with, and they'd come to the house. So that was really when I started to see what publishing was. And it's honestly been such a basis for how we've grown the company, because it's a very much a tight-knit family feel. And, when I was his personal assistant, I was making sure the writers were caffeinated. I was making sure they were parking in the right spots. I was making sure they were fed and, doing all these things that maybe to some people were mundane and silly, but I loved it because I got to meet all of them. I got to interface with all of them. I got to meet all the artists and the writers, and it was a super cool experience. And I learned quickly the importance of collaboration, how Luke works, his getting to learn his brain and how he honestly is an A&R in himself and figuring out, okay, this person would be great. Let's pull this person in for Katie and for Katy Perry, not me. And, for Miley and stuff like that. Like it was a really cool kind of really on the ground learning what publishing is and how songwriters work together and craft songs and getting to hear certain songs from like demo stage to then cut and released on the radio. I mean, that entire process was just mind blowing to me. So I knew as I was learning that, I kept thinking like, I think this is where I want to be. And so that was sort of the first life I lived at Prescription, and then started really full blown A&R after that. Started signing my own people, bringing people into the company. I have a pretty eclectic taste in music. So, and if you see the people I've brought in, it's kind of across the board in every genre. Always loved Nashville. I grew up listening to pretty much everything, but definitely was a Shania Twain fan and Dixie Chicks and stuff like that. We had a couple writers who lived here. I became the Nashville point person, kind of was something that my boss at the time who was running Prescription, she knew that was going to be, this would be a good place for me just because it's close to home. It's got sort of the entertainment business, but also feels a little bit more, I don't know, small town feel, I guess, even though it's a big city. And yeah, I started coming here like once a quarter. And then back in 2016, I had a trip here. I met a ton of unsigned writers and they were all telling me the same story, which was basically, I know that, because all of them were so talented and it kind of blew my mind that they weren't signed yet and they didn't have a publisher. And they all just said, there's amazing music here and there's amazing publishers here, but it's all really in country. There's not really any company doing the pop thing or really outside of country thing. And some of them even had offers from some of those companies, but they all just said, I just don't know if it's the right fit for me. I don't know that they have the connections in LA that I need. And so it was at that point that a light bulb went off for me. And I just thought, wow, there's a massive market here that I don't know that people are taking full advantage of. So I went home, had that conversation, talked to Luke about it, and he loved the idea. And then I moved here and opened the office, and we have 5 employees that are working here. We now have about 30 songwriters who live in Nashville. That's both people I've brought in, we've signed as a company, or people who have moved here from LA or Miami. We've had a couple of transplants from Miami too. So it's been a really cool experience. So yeah, of course, there are many details along the way, but that's sort of the long/short version of how I got here. That's
a really amazing story. I mean, like definitely really trial by fire. Like talk about just throwing yourself into it. 2 things that immediately like struck me that I found to be really interesting that you mentioned was, one, how Prescription Songs as a company, essentially built up from you and Dr. Luke working in his house and building it up from there. But now, being as big of a company as it is and working with as many creatives as you do, still maintaining that family structure. And also, in terms of how you look for artists, it sounds like that carries on. And it's also really fascinating to me that you identified in Nashville a market for pop that wasn't being addressed. And I think that that's particularly interesting because I'm sure you hear this all the time that, songwriters, artists, bands, whatever, you name it, creatives in the music industry, they often hear like, well, you got to be in a music city. You need to be in Nashville or LA. But even in the case of what you saw, like there was an obstacle there for the people that were in that city. They were still struggling, and you guys kind of rose to that occasion to meet that need. I thought both of those things were really, really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting. It's interesting every day. I mean, I think so funny. I feel like in recent conversations too, from my like colleagues and friends, I get a lot of, honestly, like, can't believe that you did that you left LA and you really started from scratch. And my brain, it didn't seem like, of course, it seemed like a big change. I didn't foresee it as such an obstacle. And now that I've been here almost 6 years, 100% it was an obstacle. Like I think, sit back and I think like, what was I thinking? I mean, I'm so glad I did it. And I'm so glad that I'm still here and we still have so much work to do. But I am crazy. Like what was I thinking? But I think that, I'm so passionate about it and I'm so excited that I came here still. And even though I've almost been here 6 years, I think that's what drives me, is that I know there's still so much work to be done here. And I think we've absolutely made a dent, but there's a pretty steep hill to climb. And what's amazing about Nashville is the infrastructure that is already here. The country music community is so special. There's nothing like it at all. I mean, there's just nothing like it. It's a very shielded, incredible group of people, and they have made, country music is massive and it's so special. And I think that there's so much since I was in LA almost 7 years, and being here now, I think about all of the things I wish our LA community would take note of.
Man, that's a power statement right there.
Well, it goes both ways, right? Like there are things I also think, Nashville needs to take note of in LA. There's a lot of the differences. I think there's a lot of within the industry. I always say like the music wheel on pop is moving at the speed of light, and it changes every single day. I feel like with country, it's slower. Things that are adopted in pop music are often adopted by country a couple of years later. And that's fine. Again, it's sort of a well-oiled machine and it does what it does. And again, they're doing fine. They're doing great. I think what Nashville does well is they celebrate the wins. They put songwriters on a pedestal. They celebrate the writers here, and the writers here are just as well known as the artists, which I just think is, obviously, I think that's not necessarily why writers and producers get into what they do. The reason they're behind the scenes is for a reason, but I do think it baffles me, honestly, that at the Grammy Awards, that artists aren't first and foremost thanking the writers who created those songs if they didn't write it themselves. And when I got here, to this day, when I go to like the Country Music Awards, the BMI Awards, the ASCAP Awards, it is truly every single time an artist gets up, it is the first thing they do. They thank the writers, they thank the people they wrote it with, or they thank the people who pitched them the song, or whatever it's just like, I'm like, this is what we need more of, because these writers are working so hard and tirelessly, and often it is totally a thankless job, and truly just having that recognition would mean everything. I also think, Nashville could speed up the process a bit. I think their wheel yes, it goes slow, but like you got to keep up with how our industry is now. And I think, finally I've after being here as long as I have, I'm seeing how more and more people are also understanding the value and the excitement of having a crossover hit, having something that can work in both markets. I mean, I think as soon as people see those dollar signs from a pop hit, they're like, oh, okay, yep, want to get into that.
I get it now. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's something really special about this place. I think that the fact that what I always tell people is, below the genre here, it's a songwriting town. It's a town where people learn to craft songs and make songs. You don't come to Nashville and you're the vibe guy in the room. That doesn't exist here, which it very much exists in LA. You need to pick up a guitar. You need to sit down at the piano. You need to sing. You need to be able to literally walk in a blank room that maybe has a guitar sitting there and be able to write a song. Like, that is what Nashville is. And I think that's just really freaking cool. And I, to this day, don't understand how they do it. I don't know how writers just go in a room and write a song. It makes no sense to me, but I'm super grateful for them because they're amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to compare the cultures of Nashville and LA in the music space. I have these conversations all the time with friends and our team members even, that live in Nashville, or friends that live in LA. It's so interesting to hear about the difference of music culture in those cities. And again, like going back to what I was saying before about how like the blanket advice is just go to a music city, but like what music city are you going to and why? I think more and more as the industry evolves, that's going to be a question that professionals have to ask themselves. It sounds like that's something that you kind of, dig your heels into a bit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap, obviously, whether you're a creator or you work on the business side. Having the tenacity, the grit, the respect, the hustle, all of those things are absolutely crucial if you want to be in this business. And it was funny, I was talking to someone the other day who actually said this, and it was very well put. He said, if there is anything else you want to do with your life, do that. Don't do this, because it's amazing and it's so rewarding when you have the good moments, but it is so taxing and it is so tough. And the truth is, sure, we work in music. It's supposed to be fun, and it is fun. And luckily those fun moments most of the time outwash all of the really hard moments. But as a creator, it is a lot. Like there's a lot that is taken from you, and it's not easy. You don't know when your next check is coming in, or if it's coming in, or when it's coming in. It's a really stressful time for that. I think, being a creator in general, you're one of, I think I heard a statistic that the Spotify's and Apple's and all the DSPs get up to 40,000 songs a day that they are putting out. And you have to somehow stick out between all of those to be even considered for playlisting. And, there's just so many things you have to think about. And so it was an interesting, obviously, I think it's what I realized with my life too, once I decided that music was definitely my path. To this day, I don't know that I could do anything else. I genuinely, I have no thought to that, which to me makes me realize that this is where I'm supposed to be. And I think that creators have to feel that way too. You really have to, because when it's hard, but you have to just know, okay, that I'm here. I'm here because I love music, because I want, this is therapy for me. A lot of my writers are like, when I'm writing, that is my therapy. That is how I help myself feel better. And hopefully if someone resonates with it, that's great. And if I can help someone else with that, that's great. And I think obviously a lot of us love music because it's gotten us through a lot of shitty times in our life. And, that's why I think it's important to have music in general.
I think you said it well. It's that passion that locks you into this is where I'm supposed to be. This is the only thing that I'm supposed to be doing that, keeps you going through the hard times and allows you to do the things that you do day in, day out. I'm curious, and I think a lot of our listeners would be, there are some, as with a lot of roles in the music industry, I think the role of a songwriter or the role of a producer tends to be pretty clear cut, or people have a good sense of what they're getting into when we talk about those roles. But I think A&R it carries a bit of mystique with it as what you do every day. I'm curious, for our listeners, I'm sure they would love to know, what does a day in the life for you look like? What is I hate to use the word average because I'm sure it's anything but.
It's different all the time. But yeah, I'd say the easy answer there is I'm a matchmaker. I meet people, songwriters, producers, artists. I obviously have my roster of all of those things. And my job, the favorite thing that I get to do that I think genuinely fuels me is I get to meet Joe Schmo and Sally and be like, wow, Joe is an incredible lyricist, and Sally, her melodies are unreal. I'm going to put them in a room together, and I'm going to pull in my producer here, who is really great with guitar riffs, whatever it might be. And I'm going to put them in a room and see what magic comes out of it. That is a lot of what an A&R does from the publishing side. The other side of it is the pitching part, and whether that's pitching songs to label A&Rs and execs, or directly to an artist, or directly to their manager. So getting songs placed, and then also figuring out when I'm doing that matchmaking thing, hey, Rihanna's doing sessions. Who do you have? We really need some strong lyricists, or she's looking for a producer. Who do you have? So it's figuring out that strategy. Or, hey, this other amazing artist is not writing for this album, but we need songs in this vein. Here's the inspiration playlist. And then I go back to my desk and I'm looking at my roster and I'm saying, okay, who's the best strategy here? How do we figure out who's going to deliver the best product here? And I'd say a lot of my day is strategy. It's also figuring out the strategy of who's going to work well in the room together in a songwriting session. And then the other part of it is the strategy of, okay, sure, this A&R might be the A&R on this project, but is he really going to be the most effective? Well, I don't know. For this project, maybe it's better to go to the manager. Oh, this writer has a direct relationship with this artist. Cool. He should just text it to him. It's like figuring out that spider web of what's going to be the most effective. I'm also always down to hit all of those angles if we have them, whether it's send the song to the manager, send the song to the A&R. But, you kind of learn the ins and outs of who is going to be the most effective and who's going to actually get it heard by the correct person who actually is the ultimate person who has the power to get the song out in the world. And that part is tricky. A lot of that stuff is a total needle in a haystack. It is like the pitch game is hard. It has been for years. It really is more than just shooting an email to somebody. It's really trying to figure out how are we going to best play this game here and how are we going to get the best placement and actually make sure that these songs get heard. So I'd say those are sort of the main things. And then I'd say, honestly, a lot of what I do is I play therapist. We joke about it, but it's true. I mean, a lot of it is talking to writers and making them feel better when they've had a rough session or they've had a rough day or their single didn't do what we thought it was going to do, or, the session that they had actually didn't go as well as we hoped, or they met, it can go on and on, but that's a lot of what we do. Publishers play I think, a very cool role because I always joke, we're kind of the fun aunt. Like we get to be, we're not like, we have no skin in the game other than making great songs and hoping that they do well. And of course, we're always going to drive to get the best product. But we get to really be a creative partner. We don't have to think about TikTok strategy and like all the other things that labels have to worry about, or even a manager would have to worry about. Our job is literally to help make the best songs possible. That is what our job is. Everything else hopefully will fall into place. And of course, like I ultimately end up doing a lot of that other stuff that I just mentioned, but it's at the end of the day, when I remember like what my sole job is, it is literally to make the best songs possible and make sure that they are getting heard by the correct people. And that's the bottom line. But I think, again, what fuels me is getting that text message at the end of a session. Holy shit, I'm obsessed with this person. I'm so glad you introduced me to them. They're my new musical soulmate. Oh my gosh, I want them on all of my sessions next week. Like that is just, I don't know why. It just makes me, I'm like, yes, great. Because you just know you're going to get great songs out of that too.
I think that's so amazing. I mean, for one, it's really interesting and really insightful how your role differs from, the A&Rs on the label side that you might interface with and, work with to make sure, the right songs land with the right artist when that time comes. But I think that matchmaker is such a cool word for it. And hearing you talk about it, like the passion just kind of like flows out of you, which is really neat. I think that from a strategy perspective, though, it's really interesting that, you can view yourself kind of in that way as like, I'm a creative strategic partner with the songwriters and the producers that I'm working with and really trying to fit people in, with the right team, essentially. Like it's team building exercise, which I think is really cool. I'm curious from a process standpoint, like, have you found it natural to you, from early days that it was like, oh, I've got an ear for this, that I know, I guess an ear for this from a musical perspective, but also like, from a relationship perspective to know I've got eyes and ears on how these people act, their idiosyncrasies as creatives, that I know who would work well together, both from a musical standpoint and a creative standpoint, but also from an interpersonal standpoint?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think all of us suffer from a little bit of imposter syndrome to this day. I've been doing this almost 12 years and I'm like, am I good at this? I don't know. I think it always just comes back to what you're a fan of and why you got into this. I have to constantly remind myself, it's funny when people ask me, I get this question all the time. What are you listening to right now? And the truth is, all I do for my job is listen to music. So I'm always listening to my people and I love my people. And so that's what I'm listening to right now. When I'm at home and I'm cleaning my house or I'm driving my car, I'm listening to things I grew up on, honestly. A lot of 90s, a lot of rock, a lot of Beatles, a lot of Eagles, things that, I mean, that's what I love. And that's what made me love music. So it's interesting. Of course, I'm always listening to the new stuff that's coming out too, because that's also what I'm trying to get in for my writers. But what I love and what I'm passionate about is really what I was raised on. So it's an interesting thing. And I think, there are probably a lot of people who think they can be A&Rs. And I do think that if you have genuine passion for music and you listen to things and whether it's you love the melodies or you love the storytelling or whatever, hopefully all encompassing, I think all that stuff is great. And I think the other thing that is a hard thing to recognize that even I am still learning every day, but is sometimes you don't have to love it. But if you hear it and you know that it sounds good for a certain genre, okay, how do we get it to the right place? For example, I love hip hop. I don't know that I'm the, token person to be setting up hip hop sessions. Yeah. I have a couple of writers who work very much in that world and they're amazing, but I have partners who I know are much more equipped to be putting them in rooms with people that maybe I don't know about yet, or, maybe when I send them to Atlanta, we've got enough contacts there, which is awesome. But then once we get those songs, I want to make sure that I'm getting them to the people on my team who are much more equipped for that. It's sort of like knowing what you're good at and leaning into your strengths. And, and even on the countryside, that same thing. I love my country that I grew up on, but I couldn't tell you that I listen to country radio right now. That's not my forte. However, I hired someone who does, who's amazing, who knows the world very well. Cool. He's going to be the person that I'm really going to lean on. And so I think, again, I also think I can hear a song and be like, this to me sounds like a country hit. Even if it's not something that I'm living and breathing every day, I think just having that knowledge of, what a good lyric is and what something sonically is going to be relevant, whatever is hot right now, you hopefully have that thought and that relevancy. So yeah. And I feel like you had a second part to that question.
The interpersonal side and connecting people.
I think that's a big part of it too, because I think there is a lot of great people who work in A&R, but are maybe more on the research side because the social part of it isn't what really interests them. And the truth is, as A&Rs, a huge part of our job is maintaining relationships. That is everything. I mean, maybe even more important than having a good ear is having those relationships and maintaining them. And again, using the strategy. Even if it's crazy how many times this happens. We talk about this as a team all the time. When you hear a single that comes out from a big artist and it's a single maybe we've all been gunning for as publishers. We're like, okay, this person's looking and we know they're releasing. And then you hear the single and you think, would never have pitched that ever. That is not even close.
Yeah.
So it's a constant reminder that none of us know. None of us know what direction people are going to end up going in, or what they say they want oftentimes is not what they want. There was one time I got a brief from somebody that said they were looking for Post Malone meets Casey Musgraves. No clue what that means. No clue how I'm supposed to pull up my, my folder of that. But I think what you learn and realize is what people want when they're saying things like that is they want good songs. They want songs that are resonating with people. And they want the songs that made you feel the way that they felt when they first heard a Post Malone song, or when they first heard a Casey Musgrave song, or maybe it was the third time they heard one of those songs, but it stuck with them. And so, yeah, I think the social aspect and personal aspect of it is huge. It's everything. It's, the reason you get songs past the finish line is because of the relationships you keep with people, and timing is everything. I've watched many songs get placed because we were out to dinner with somebody and had a great time. And then after the dinner, oh, hey, by the way, I wanted to send you this song. I think it'd be great with your artist so-and-so. And it's just like, that is the reality. That's how it happens. It is all about who you know and the relationships that you keep.
I think that those are like, from, looking at it from a strategic level, like the leveraging of creativity and the leveraging of relationships together. If that's the role, that's really cool. You must love your job.
Awesome. Honestly, during COVID, that was like probably the hardest part. I realized after being home for a couple months, I kept thinking, I think I didn't realize how much I loved hanging with people, and Zoom is awesome, but just sitting in my office, even just sitting with my team and bouncing ideas back and forth, and like listening to music and having, I don't know, just thinking and talking out loud. And that stuff is everything. And we can do our jobs from anywhere, but there's something to be said about sitting with people in person. And yeah, I just think it's a really important piece. And like I said, I realized during COVID, that's a big reason why I love what I do, because I get to meet people and I get to sit with people and build relationships. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm curious. I would love to hear, like, I'm sure you've seen plenty of songwriters, producers, artists even, and watch them try to navigate the music business from an A&R perspective. I'm curious of what your experience has been like kind of witnessing that, and what advice you might have for those types of creatives who are, whether they're looking to get signed or they're looking to find their next collaborator or they're trying to pitch songs, what advice you would give, and, war stories that you might share from just kind of being a witness to that.
Yeah, man. Songwriting's hard. It is hard. I will say we'll go in a couple stages here. I think the first stage is if you're trying to get into songwriting, if you want to be a songwriter, I definitely agree with that statement you mentioned. Move to the city where it is, whether it's Nashville or LA. There's even a lot happening in Miami now. New York is pretty scarce, but there is still something. I think you definitely gotta be somewhere where it's existing, and you gotta hustle. I think that a lot of people, for some reason, in every stage of their songwriting career, sort of think that like once you check off one part of the box, like, okay, cool, I moved to the city. So where are the sessions?
Yeah.
Like, you got to find them. You got to go to songwriting right here in Nashville, go to writers rounds, literally go to bars anywhere, probably avoid Broadway because that's more of a tourist place, but figure out where everybody's hanging out outside of that. There's a bar called Red Door here that is like apparently the biggest networking bar ever. It's where everyone goes to drink and goes after their sessions or after shows, and go there. Literally just sit there and meet people. And Nashville's a very friendly place. So I feel like it's a lot easier to do that here. Pretty much every barista you meet, every waiter or waitress, most of them are songwriters. And so it's really just about, hey, we should write sometime. That's literally how it happens. And then if you can snag yourself a spot on a writer's round, or, start performing in places around town. I mean, those are the ways that people start to hear about you and notice. And the truth is, especially in a place like Nashville, everybody started, and in LA, everybody's starting somewhere always. So most of the time it's really just about meeting one person who can then sort of open the door and introduce you to more people, but you got to hustle. I
think that's really good advice. You're looking to meet that one person who's just maybe 2 more steps ahead of you.
100%. That is, because that's all it takes. You have that one person that maybe you really hit it off writing wise, and then maybe they're already signed and they're already working with an artist, and they're again, that's another way how it happens. There's people who get pulled in on sessions who have never had a cut before, but then they happened to meet this one dude at a coffee shop and they ended up writing one day. And this producer now thinks you're the most amazing writer ever. And he wants to pull you in with his session with this big artist. That's how it happens. And so the hustle is real. You got to do it. Even if you have massive social anxiety, you got to get over it and you got to figure it out, because the hustle is so real. And you have to remember that if you don't hustle and if you aren't out there and putting your name out there, there are like 50 people plus who are doing that and more, and are likely going to get that opportunity before you do. So you have to do the bare minimum, which is just getting out there. From getting a deal perspective, I think one thing that I have learned, especially because I work with at Prescription, we work with mostly developing acts in the beginning. Most of the people we sign here are people we're passionate about. We heard a link to their music. We think it's amazing. We offer them a deal, which is so cool. I mean, that's such a rare thing these days, where most people are chart chasing or finding and signing the viral things on TikTok. Luke is actually kind of, he's more in the head space of let's find the thing before it goes viral and let's work with that, which is amazing. However, I do think that one thing that I've learned now that I've been doing this about 12 years, there's definitely a sense of people thinking, oh, once I'm signed, then the hits just start coming. Or, oh, now that I'm signed to you, now I'm going to have so many cuts and so many placements. And yes, that's the goal, but we are literally working from ground zero. And it is our job to open doors for you, but it is not our job to do the work for you.
Yeah. Getting signed is really where the work begins.
100%. It's 100% where the work begins. You get in advance and you got to make that money back, and you got to become a profitable business for yourself and for your partner. And so, it's interesting having conversations with people a couple years in, and they're like, well, where's my number one? Where's my hit? Where's my Selena Gomez cut? And I'm like, hopefully coming soon, but just because you've been doing this a couple of years now doesn't mean that those things are automatic. And I love to tell this, so many stories of underdogs. Like Luke signed Doja Cat when she was 17 years old. And, that took 7 years before Say So. Obviously she had a couple of viral things before that, but before her first number one song, it was 7 years of hustle and grind and figuring out the sound and how they work together. And I think Lizzo is not ours. I wish, but love her. And she's I feel like people think for some reason, and this happens all the time, like, oh, she just blew up overnight. And no, girl was hustling for years. And I remember the first time her publisher sent her our way and she was nobody. And we all loved her and we were like, wow, there is nothing like this. And that was another probably 8-year journey for her. And I know she talks pretty openly about that. I think people forget that this stuff is, it just takes time. Also, by the way, some people get lucky after a year or maybe 2, but then they become irrelevant after that because maybe they didn't have the fuel behind them that they needed, or they made the wrong decision with the wrong team or whatever. None of this stuff is promised. And that's why you have to always kind of center back to, okay, I'm in this because I love music and because I want to write things that resonate with people and connect with people. But I would just say the work starts once you get that deal. It is not, you have not peaked. And very happy for you, very excited for you. We're excited to get in together. We're excited to be your partner. But the work starts, the clock starts then. Now it's time to hustle and now it's time to grind. And the job of your publisher or your manager or your label or your agent, whatever it might be, my thought there is you're driving the ship. You should always be driving the ship. We are just simply here to open the doors for you and open more doors that hopefully you're not already opening yourself. And I think that's just such a thing that needs to be remembered. And that, this bit, again, circling back to what I was saying at the very beginning, it is hard. It's a hard career to choose to follow. And so you have to just know that the hustle has to be there no matter what. We have this one writer named Nick Bailey, who is truly an angel on this earth. And he's been with us for probably 8 years. He was in bands forever. And he lived in LA. He moved to Nashville, which we have been so excited to have him. But I am not kidding. This kid he's not a kid now, but I still think, like, I don't know, we came up together. I adore him, but he truly has the same attitude that he had the day that we signed him at Prescription. And that is, I just love music. I just hope my music gets heard. And the guy will DM anyone. He will, if he sees someone out, he will say hi to them, introduce himself, say he'd love to send them a song. He hustles so hard and it shows. He's one of our top songwriters. And yes, we're giving him opportunities, but he's making those opportunities for himself too. And I just think he's such a good example of how you have to grind and how you have to, attempt. I know it can't always be easy to just be having a positive attitude at all times, but I think you also, being grateful for what you have and how far you've come and being reminded of, where you were 2 years ago. I mean, there's so much that can happen in a year. But to me, it's just crazy. Like every day I'm baffled. He comes and says hello and he's so positive. And he's like, oh yeah, I was DMing with this artist today. And I sent him this demo and he's friends with all these random artists now. And, he's worked with them in sessions, but he stays in touch with them. He sends them songs directly. And that's not necessarily his job, but he knows that that's hopefully going to help push the needle. And I think a lot of people just expect that once you have that team, that's solely their job, which by the way, it is our job, but there is no harm in also doing that extra mile, because the truth is that personal touch, especially if you're friends with that artist, they're going to be so much more invested than, business person to business person sending a song, and who knows,
Yeah, I think that's great practical advice about what it means to hustle. Because I think people hear that, and they automatically think about like Gary Vee being like, you got to hustle. And it's like, well, what does that really mean? I think that's great. Like, that's great, well broken down practical advice about what it means to network and not be like scummy about it and not feel weird.
One thing, to circle back to sort of my story, one thing that Chris Anacute told me when he put my resume forward for this job with Luke, because, when he recommended me, he was saying such nice things about me and we still hadn't met in person. And I was so dumbfounded and honored, but I was like, listen, this is so nice. You're like putting your neck out for me. And I am just so grateful. And hopefully I'll repay you one day, and his response was, you've always been persistent, but you've been respectful. And I think that has always stuck with me, because I think that is exactly how we should all be, including songwriters. Like, there's nothing, what I always tell people, because they're like, I feel weird about DMing people, or I feel weird texting him, like I never heard back from him. I'm like, guys, you have nothing to lose. Literally, you have nothing to lose by just checking in with people and maintaining a relationship. There's the truth is, people are bad on text. They forget to respond to things or forget to call you back or whatever. We're all guilty of it. But what's the worst? I always say, what's the worst that's going to happen? And I would consistently check in with Chris. I'm like, the worst that's going to happen is he's going to ghost me, or he's too busy for me, or whatever. Like, you won't know unless you try. You won't ever. Wouldn't you rather know that you did everything you could to try to get a song to somebody, or to try to get signed at this publishing company or whatever, than be like, oh, well, I actually never did anything because I knew that they probably wouldn't respond. You just never know. You don't know. And again, even if that's the worst case scenario, that's not that bad. That's
amazing advice. It's really interesting. There's a corollary here. Something I've recommended to artists before when it comes to their marketing is to think about, like, you're kind of in like 5th or 6th place in someone's mind and attention. You're not really competing with another band. You're competing with like their bills, their job, their wife, their kids, school, their mortgage. You're kind of in like 6th or 7th place. And I think that applies to, being a, person to person, hand to hand kind of marketing for yourself as a songwriter or producer. Same thing applies. Like, send that second text because they might have just forgot because they were at the store picking up, groceries.
Yep. Then the truth is, what I have learned, again, falls into the therapy side. Part of why I love working with songwriters is they're also sensitive.
Yeah.
And emotional. And that's why we get amazing songs, because they are able to be vulnerable like that. But it's so funny to me how many of them will say, well, I texted him and he didn't respond. I'm like, okay, follow up.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean he doesn't like you, but it's like this immediate, they must not like me or whatever. And I'm like, man, even Luke, who's my boss, I mean, he's the first to admit I'm the worst texter of all time. Their creators are meant to create. They're not supposed to be on their phones and texting and calling and stuff, and sometimes, it just takes a little bit of a nudge, but I think there's, and understandably so, there's also a layer of just insecurity of feeling like you're always trying to chase and you're always trying to, capitalize on these relationships you have, but that's what you're supposed to do. That's how this business works. And again, it's really, and you don't want to be slimy ever. You just want to be able to be respectful and persistent. And I think that's super important in trying to move your career into always trying to turn it into the next level, or those two things, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Oh man, I'm so excited to hear the feedback that we get from this episode, because like I said, there's a lot of songwriters and producers in particular in our community and in our listener base, and we don't get to talk about this stuff all that much. We're often
I think it's so cool that you guys are talking about it, because I think there's such a mystery, not only like you said around A&R, but publishing in particular. I admittedly had no idea what publishing was before I got into it. And I 100% assumed that all artists wrote their songs. And you realize the greats like Whitney Houston and like Celine Dion, a lot of these greats, people that I looked up to growing up, they didn't write their songs, or they didn't write all of their songs, and I just think there's something, it's such an important part of what we do. And ironically too, when I was first getting into music and taking advice from people, I actually consistently got this feedback that was, you should get into publishing because it's never going to go away. And I at the time didn't really understand what that meant, because I didn't really know what publishing was. And also this was back in early 2010. So, labels, there was a moment there where labels were about to be non-existent, because in my head, I just was like, oh, I'll work at a record label. But I think it's so true. And it's so important, I think, to have these conversations and to educate people on what publishing is and what songwriters do and the importance of them, because without songwriters and without songs, we have no artists and we have no music. That is just the bottom line. It's like this you're like, whoa, without all of them, we have nothing. We have no music. And how sad would that be?
Yeah. Songwriters are at the core of it all.
Literally the core. And so we need to take care of them, and we need to make sure that they feel taken care of and that they feel like their craft is important, so. Yeah.
Well, speaking of music publishing and from the ground level, figuring it out from the first time when you were stepping into this world to now being in the position that you're in, kind of seeing it evolve, what's changing with music publishing and where do you see it going? I feel like that's a question that you're better equipped to answer than anybody that I've ever asked. So I'm very curious what you think about it. Big one, I know.
I have many thoughts. I mean, I think the biggest, it's more of my hope for the future of songwriting and publishing rather than where I see it going. I'm hoping they're intertwined.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Songwriters are, with the age of streaming, they're just not paid correctly at all. And there's a lot happening and attempts at changing that. We've had a couple wins here and there, but it's just not enough. It's not a sustainable lifestyle. And I think that what's so hard for me as a publisher is when I have my writers coming to me and saying, I'm broke, or I can't pay my rent or whatever. I wish I had more to say. I wish I had an answer that was, the only answer I have is keep writing. Just keep writing. Please don't give up writing. Just keep doing it. It only takes one. We'll get there, but there's only so much of that you can say. And I know how hard it must be. And I wish that, when I got into publishing, I think 2 years into working for Luke was when Spotify was launched. I remember we got the beta version of it. And before that, we were still, and even like my first 4 years, we were still buying songs on iTunes. And, even then that was something a bit more, especially if it was a hit, you had something that was going to hopefully sustain your lifestyle, but it's just hard. And my hope and prayer is that we will find a solution in making sure that songwriters are properly compensated. There's a lot of conversation, and there has been for the last couple of years, about labels paying songwriters in addition to producers when songs are cut, and also giving songwriters a portion of the master percentage or the points that producers receive, like figuring out how we can also compensate the songwriters. Producers obviously do a lot of work before, during, after sessions, which is why they are paid for their work via a fee in addition to publishing they're likely getting. Yeah. But songwriters are doing a lot of work too. And so I think there's definitely some cool things that I've been hearing about in terms of getting creative, whether it's the label paying them or maybe it's a project that is, I feel like in this age of Web3 and NFTs and stuff like that, I think there's going to be hopefully some new opportunities for writers where they will have the opportunity to be paid for their work up front or, once a song is placed. I think I do have faith that that is going to change the game. But, what's so sad about it and what's so frustrating and hard is that, again, you can't stop making songs. And what needs to happen is everyone has to come together to really be a united front about it. If an artist wants to cut our song, cool. There's 4 of us who wrote this song. We all need to put our foot down and say, you may have this song, sure, but we each need X amount of dollars for you to have it. Or, you're paying this a $10,000 producer fee. We each need $1,000 as the songwriters on the song as well. Like something that, and by the way, I'm seeing that happen, and I'm hoping that will continue. And we do need to keep I think these larger companies, my hope is that they will come around to that, because again, we are nothing without these songwriters. There are some who probably will not want to do this anymore if they're not properly compensated. And I think we just have to really focus on that. So I think my hope and my thought is that will eventually happen. I hope sooner rather than later. But, again, I think to bring it full circle, their publishing is never going to go away. We're always going to have songs, and we always are going to have songs. So hopefully we will be able to figure out a way for all of us to live in harmony, everyone get properly compensated for what they're doing. And again, we're making stride by stride, and hopefully it will continue down that path. But it's tough. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing vision for the future. I hope that it pans out that way as well, or that the steps are being taken to head towards that direction. And this was so much fun, Katie. I can't thank you enough for jumping on and chatting with me. For our listeners, where can they keep up with what you're doing, both at Prescription? And I also wanted to talk about, we didn't touch on this, but real quick, I know you mentioned early on when we were chatting about like addressing the market that's outside of country in Nashville. And I know you do some work in that space as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and also just let our people know where they can keep up with you.
Yeah, totally. We, as a company, we actually do not have a website, but we are pretty active on our Instagram. So if you go on our handle, RX Songs, we post all of our releases that come out every Friday. And we also do fun little things here and there. We go live with some of our writers. We do Q&As with the A&Rs and the people who signed them and stuff like that. So you can kind of learn our roster and our staff just by looking at our Instagram, which is really great. And shout out to Jillian, who's our head of digital, who has really grown our Instagram from day one.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's really nice, especially since we don't have a website. So it's nice to just have something to point to, and it's personal. It's run by us. So it's really nice.
Yeah. Get him on the gram, gang.
Yeah, exactly. So feel free to give us a follow. And you can follow my personal Instagram if you want to. It's just Katie M. Fagan. Lots of a nice little mix of music and my 2 little boys. So hopefully you're ready for some baby content too. Obviously, by default on the prescription side, we're doing tons of both music creation, signing things on the non-country side. But when I moved here, I also co-founded an organization in town called the Other Nashville Society, Tons for short. If you want to follow us as well. And also we do have a website, theothernashvillesociety.com. Basically, I got together with a couple of my friends who it was right when I moved here. And one thought that I had when I got here was, how do I find all these people that I know exist here outside of the people that I had met on that last trip where the light bulb went off for me? But I was having a hard time trying to locate all of the people making non-country music. And so in my first thought was, we need a website, or we need a community forum or something where we can all sort of, hey, who's a producer? Raise your hand. Who's, how can I find these people? And I opened that idea to a friend of mine, and she ended up introducing me to another guy in town, this guy, Josh Collum, who runs a sync licensing company in town and has a publishing arm now as well. And he had the same idea, and he was saying, I'd love to just kind of start a community with it and figure out how we can get everybody together, because there really isn't an infrastructure for non-country music here. And so we decided to just throw an opening event, basically just a mixer in town. And we had 500 people show up to the first event.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy. We all looked at each other. We thought maybe 20 to 30 people might show up, and then 500 people later. And it was amazing. And we just all looked at each other and thought, man, okay, this was definitely needed. And so we have, I think we just met last week. I think we have 2,000 members now and growing. Every member goes through an approval process with all the co-founders. And basically it's just, are you a legitimate human who is doing something for the community that would benefit everyone? So, not necessarily someone who's still in college and making music, but rather somebody who, works at an established company or has started their own company and does XYZ for the non-country community, like whatever it is that, can be beneficial to the people here. And so we do events every quarter. During COVID, it was obviously a big challenge. We kind of had to take a backseat, but the core of who we are is events. So we do, we call them Tons Talks, which is basically like creative panels. We have different topics every time. And then our mixers are really just a place for people to meet. And we have some things coming up in the next year that we're super excited about. We partnered with Twitch this year. We always partner with Music Biz, which is always in Nashville. So it's cool. It's been a really incredible thing for us to be able to have. Yeah. And it's brought a really cool community together. So it's been awesome.
That's so great. I'll make sure that we link to Tons in the show notes.
Yeah.
So that everybody can check it out. And if you're in Nashville, make sure you give it a glance. That's amazing. And talk about, there's the hustle. Like you got there and you were like, hey, we need to get people together. So this is how we're going to do it. Boom. Yeah. 500 people show up. That's so cool.
The coolest surprise ever, but again, it was a very validating moment. It was just okay, cool. This is needed. This is wanted. I moved here and it was the right move, That's amazing. Oh my gosh. This was so much fun. Thank you, Katie, so much for being here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that everybody loved this interview and this chat. I certainly did. And we'll have to keep up with Katie and everything that she's up to. I hope you guys dig this. We'll catch you next time on Creative Juice. Peace out, Indies. East Coast, West Coast, say what?